I have always been firmly convinced that a person who has lived to the age of 75 should have the right to a peaceful old age. No upheavals, no dramas, just peace and respect. Funny how life likes to disprove even the most reasonable beliefs. My name is Oswald Farrell. I've been a geological engineer all my life, traveled half the country in search of minerals. I can't say I've had a distinguished career, but I've always done my work with integrity and dedication. This has earned me a reputation as a stubborn perfectionist who is hard to budge from his chosen position. Your stubbornness could move mountains, my Evelyn used to joke. Evelyn. 2 years have passed since she was gone, and I still occasionally turn to the empty half of the bed to share a thought or just smile. 47 years together, almost half a century. We met at a university party. She was studying literature, and I was studying geology. Despite our different interests, we hit it off immediately. Evelyn had an amazing ability to see beauty in the most ordinary things. Your stones, Oswald, are the frozen history of the earth, she would say as she looked at my specimens. We have 2 children, Hazel and Tristan. They're 1 year old, but they're so different, like they came from different planets. Hazel had always been more like me, stubborn, pragmatic. I hoped those qualities would help her in life. Tristan inherited his mother's gentleness, her curiosity, and her broad-mindedness. He followed in my footsteps. He became a geologist and spends most of his life in expeditions. After Evelyn's death, our house in the suburbs of Fairmont, where we had lived for 30 years, seemed monstrously empty. Every corner reminded me of her. There was her favorite chair by the window where she spent hours reading. There was the kitchen where she worked on her culinary masterpieces. There was the garden where she grew roses which now withered slowly. Without her care, "Daddy, you need to sell the house," Hazel said on one of her rare visits. "It's too big for one person, and it's getting expensive to maintain." "Why sell?" I objected. "I have enough money, a decent pension, and savings." "Sherby, you don't understand," she shook her head irritably. "The house needs constant maintenance. The roof leaks, the plumbing's broken. And if you fall down those creaky stairs, who would help you?" There was logic in what she said, but it was the other thing that made the difference. "Tristan is worried about you. He's away on an expedition and can't come, but he called me yesterday. He said you seemed depressed when you talked on the video link." Tristan had indeed called me recently from some remote corner of the world where he was studying rare minerals. The connection was intermittent, but I was glad to see his face weathered and tanned. I tried to look cheerful, but it was hard to fool my son. "Okay," I gave in. "Maybe you're right. The sale of the house went faster than I expected." The realtor, a young, energetic woman with a keen eye, found buyers in 2 weeks. I was happy with the amount, although Hazel insisted on a higher price. "Don't be naive, Dad. The real estate market is booming," she said with that special tone she'd developed in recent years. Condescending, as if she were explaining obvious things to a child. But I was firm. The amount was fair, and I didn't want to drag out the sale. I liked the young family with 2 children who were looking at our house. I imagined the sound of children's laughter in the garden and the smell of baking in the kitchen. The question of where I should move had somehow resolved itself. Tristan was still on an expedition and couldn't take me in, and his small apartment was more like a warehouse of samples and books. Hazel and her husband, Wesley, lived in a large house on the outskirts of Fairmont, and they had a spare guest room. "You can stay with us until you decide what to do next," Hazel suggested. "Tristan will be back in a few months, and by then, you'll have made up your mind." The day we moved in, it was raining a fine, nasty rain. I stood on the porch of my former home, saying goodbye. The old oak tree by the fence that Evelyn and I had planted the first year we bought the house rustled its wet leaves, as if saying goodbye to me too. Evelyn always said trees understood more than people realize. Hazel honked impatiently from the car. "Daddy, we're late. Wesley's expecting us for dinner." I took only the bare necessities with me: clothes, a few books, a collection of minerals I'd collected all my life, and photographs. The rest was sold with the house or put into storage. Hazel and Wesley's home was in a new neighborhood of identical 2-story red brick houses. No personality, no character. The exact opposite of our old house with its creaky floorboards and uneven walls. "Welcome, Oswald," Wesley greeted me dryly as we entered. He never called me Dad, or at least Mr. Farrell, only by my first name, as if we were the same age. Wesley Price worked for some big corporation in logistics. I never really understood what exactly he did, and he wasn't eager to explain. Hazel had met him 10 years ago at a corporate party where she'd gotten there by accident, replacing a friend from the catering service who'd fallen ill. Evelyn whispered to me, "He's too smooth." I didn't pay much attention to what she said, but now I realize what she meant. Wesley was indeed smooth, like a polished stone, without a single clue to grasp at to understand what was inside him. The guest room was small and impersonal, like a room in a cheap hotel. White walls, gray curtains, a bed, a bedside table, and a closet. "Make yourself comfortable, Daddy," Hazel said. "Dinner's in an hour. If you need anything, just ask." I started putting things away. I put Evelyn's picture on the nightstand, placed the mineral collection neatly on the windowsill. The room immediately looked cozier, though it was still foreign. At dinner, Wesley talked mostly about work, about deliveries, deadlines, and incompetent coworkers. Hazel chimed in and asked leading questions. They hardly noticed me until I spoke up. "What if I looked for a small apartment closer to the center?" I suggested. "There are stores nearby and a park where you can walk." Hazel and Wesley looked at each other. "Why do you need a separate apartment?" asked her daughter. "We have plenty of room. Besides, it's not safe to live alone at your age." "I'm doing fine on my own," I countered, "and I don't want you to be cramped." "No, no, you're not embarrassing us at all," Hazel answered too quickly. "Aren't you, darling?" She looked at her husband. "Of course," Wesley said without much enthusiasm. "Our house is your home." The next morning, when I came down for breakfast, Wesley had already left for work, and Hazel was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a laptop. "Good morning, Dad," she nodded toward the stove. "Coffee's in the pot. You can make yourself some toast." I poured myself some coffee and sat down across from her. "Hazel, I wanted to ask you about the money from the sale of the house." She immediately broke away from the screen and looked at me with sudden interest. "Yes, Daddy? What was it?" "I was thinking of putting it in a separate account. Maybe invest some of it." "Invest?" She frowned. "At your age? I don't think that's a good idea. The markets are unstable. I'd rather put the money in a savings account. Wesley has a friend at the bank who can set it up." Her insistence alarmed me. "I'll handle it," I said firmly. I'd been managing my own finances all my life, and I'd done a pretty good job so far. Hazel pressed her lips together, but she didn't insist. She just said, "Suit yourself. But if you need help, don't hesitate to ask." Over the next week, I noticed a strange pattern. Hazel was much more friendly and talkative when it came to money. She took a keen interest in my pension, asked how I'd managed the money from the sale of my house, offered to help with the paperwork. But as soon as I complained of back pain or asked her to take me to the doctor, she immediately found something urgent to do. "Why don't we put it off until next week?" she'd say. "Certainly, Rowan. I have so much work to do, and Wesley is busy with this new project." Wesley barely spoke to me. If we were alone, he would either stare at his cell phone or he'd remember something urgent and leave. Sometimes I noticed him looking at me with ill-concealed irritation. In the evenings, lying in bed, I often talked to Evelyn as if she were there. "You know, honey, I don't think moving in with Hazel was the best idea," I whispered, looking at her picture. She had changed. Or maybe she'd always been like this, and I just hadn't noticed. I called Tristan once a week when he had a connection. Despite the interference and the time difference, those conversations were an outlet for me. "How are you doing, Dad?" he asked, and I could hear the genuine concern in his voice. "I'm fine, son," I said, not wanting to disturb him. "The room is comfortable. Hazel takes care of me." But one day when I was once again talking to my son via video link, Hazel entered the room without knocking. "Daddy, have you seen my blue scarf?" "I think I left it here." "Oh, are you talking to Tristan?" She quickly walked over to the screen. "Hey, little brother, how are your rocks?" "Hey, Hayes," Tristan smiled. "Everything's great. We found some interesting samples of basalt with unusual inclusions." How fascinating," she said sarcastically. "Listen, while we're talking, do you know when you'll be back? Dad's been waiting for me." "In 2 months, if everything goes according to plan," Tristan answered. "Why? Is there a problem?" "No problem," Hazel said quickly. "Just wondering. Daddy's looking good as a cucumber, aren't you, Dad?" She patted me on the shoulder so hard I almost winced. Yeah, he's fine, I confirmed, seeing the worry in my son's eyes. When the conversation was over, Hazel lingered in my room. Dad, I realize you miss Tristan, but you don't have to bother him about anything. He has important work to do. I'm not bothering him about nothing, I countered. We're just talking. Surit, kin. Sure, she said with a strained smile. By the way, I've been meaning to ask, have you decided what to do with the money from the sale of the house? There was that sudden interest in my finances again. I began to realize that I was valued here not as a father, but as a potential source of funds. It was a bitter thought, but I tried not to jump to conclusions. Perhaps I had simply become too suspicious in my old age. Or perhaps my daughter had really changed, becoming the wife of Wesley Price, for whom money seemed to be the only measure of success in life. I'm still thinking, I replied evasively. Maybe I'll put some of it aside for the education of my great-grandchildren, if there ever are any. Hazel and Wesley didn't plan to have children. Their careers came first. It was always a sore subject with our family. Evelyn dreamed of grandchildren, but never got any from her daughter. On education, Hazel repeated thoughtfully. Well, a reasonable decision, although great-grandchildren are still a long way off. She left the room and I remained sitting on the bed, looking at Evelyn's picture. What are we going to do, honey? I thought, feeling less and less at home every day in this foreign, cold house. It had been a month since I had moved into Hazel and Wesley's house. I've tried to ignore the little annoyances and inconveniences, convincing myself that I just have to get used to my new life. Evelyn always told me I was too sensitive to change. You're like those ancient minerals of yours, Oswald, she laughed. Change takes millennia. But every day it became more and more obvious that it was not my inability to adapt, but that I simply did not want to be here. The morning started the same way. I woke up early, out of old habit, when the house was still quiet. I'd make myself a cup of weak tea. Coffee was forbidden by the doctors because of my blood pressure. And sit by the window in the living room with a book or a newspaper. It was the only time I felt at peace in this house. But even these moments were disturbed when one day Wesley came down earlier than usual and found me in my favorite chair. Ah, Oswald, you're up already, he said with barely concealed irritation. Ah, I have some paperwork to do and this is my place. Of course, I'm sorry, I stood up hastily, spilling tea on my sweater. I didn't realize. Now you do. He took the chair and spread the papers out on the table, as if marking territory. From that day on, I stopped coming down to the living room in the mornings. Instead, I stayed in my room until I heard Wesley leave for work. Only then did he go out into the common areas of the house. Hazel talked to me less and less, whereas before she had at least asked how I was doing, albeit without much interest in the answer. Now our conversations were reduced to mundane matters. Sonam, Daddy, don't forget to turn off the bathroom light. The electric bill was huge last month, she'd say as she walked by. Or, we're having dinner at Peter and Lorraine's tonight, so you'll have to heat up last night's soup. Can you handle it? I nodded, trying not to show offense. After all, she had her own life, and I shouldn't expect it to revolve around me. But it was bittersweet to realize that I had become nothing more than a burden to my own daughter, which she tolerated out of a sense of duty or money. To avoid feeling superfluous, I tried to be helpful. One day when Hazel and Wesley had gone to work, I decided to make dinner, a roast from Evelyn's recipe that our children had always enjoyed. I spent half the day picking out ingredients at the nearest supermarket and then carefully cooked it, remembering Evelyn humming as she stirred the gravy. When Hazel came home, I proudly showed her my work. I made dinner, I said, smiling. Mom's roast, remember, you were always asking for more. Hazel looked around the kitchen. I did make a little mess, but I was going to clean it up and pressed her lips together. Daddy, Wesley and I are on a diet, she said in the tone one uses with a cranky child. And besides, you've turned this place upside down. I told you we have our own system in the kitchen. I'll clean it up, I assured her, feeling her enthusiasm evaporate. And you can put the roast in the fridge? Yeah, do me a favor. She picked up her phone and started typing something. And next time, please consult me before you do anything. When Wesley returned, they ordered salads from a fancy vegetarian restaurant. My roast was left untouched, and the next day I found it had been thrown away. Another time I decided to help in the garden. Wesley always complained that he didn't have time to tend to the plants. and I had once been a pretty good gardener. Evelyn joked that I had a special connection with plants, like a geologist with minerals. I weeded the beds, trimmed the bushes, even transplanted a few stunted plants that clearly lacked sun. The result was predictable. "God, Daddy, what have you done?" Hazel exclaimed when she saw my work. "These bushes were trimmed by a professional gardener in the Japanese style, and you've ruined it." "I didn't know," I replied confused. "They look neglected." "It was meant to be. It's modern minimalism." "Wesley will be furious." And indeed, when Wesley saw the garden, his face darkened. "Oswald," he said, barely containing his anger, "don't ever touch my garden again. Never. Do you understand?" I nodded, feeling like a delinquent schoolboy. I was 75 years old, but they made me feel like a helpless old man who did nothing but cause trouble. Gradually, I stopped trying to be helpful and spent more and more time in my room. I read books, went through my mineral collection, sometimes watched TV on the tablet Tristan had given me before I left for the expedition. Once in a while, I went for a walk, a small park nearby where I could sit on a bench and feed the ducks. I talked to Tristan once a week when he had a connection. Those conversations were a ray of light in the thickening darkness. "How are you, Dad?" he asked, his weathered face on the screen expressing genuine concern. "I'm fine, son," I answered, not wanting to disturb him. "How is your expedition?" He told about the findings, about the difficulties of field work, about the beauty of the wild places where they camped. I listened, smiled, and felt proud of my son, who followed in my footsteps, but achieved much more. "You know, Dad," he said one day, "I found a mineral very similar to the one you brought back from your first expedition. Remember when you showed it to me when I was a kid, with the flecks that looked like stars?" I remembered. That labradorite with the beautiful inclusions was still in my collection. I'd taken it out of the box and shown it to Tristan the next day when we talked. "Yes, it's very similar," my son smiled. "That's a good sign, isn't it?" I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I wanted to tell him how hard it was for me in this house, how unwanted I felt, but I couldn't. I didn't want to mar his expedition, to make him worry. And what could he do from out there in the middle of nowhere, where communication was a luxury? "I'll be back in a month, Dad," he said at the end of our conversation. "I've already booked the tickets. I'll come to you right away." "I'll be waiting," I answered. And that thought gave me the strength to endure. My health was beginning to fail. My blood pressure was spiking, and my joints were aching more and more, especially in the wet weather, which was not uncommon in Fairmont. I began to lose my balance more often, sometimes confusing the days of the week. Nothing serious, just the usual age-related problems, but they needed attention and care. One day I felt particularly bad, dizzy, dark spots in front of my eyes. Hazel was at home, working in her office. "Hazel," I called, standing at the door to her room. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I think I need to see a doctor." "My blood pressure," she looked up from her laptop with obvious irritation. "Dad, I have a deadline in 2 hours. Can it wait?" "Sure, no, Mom. I'm not sure," I answered honestly. I felt really bad. She sighed, closed the laptop, and stood up. "Okay, I'll take you to the clinic. Just make it quick." At the clinic where she took me, not to my regular doctor, but to some medical center on the way, I had my blood pressure measured, was told it was really high, got a prescription for new pills, and was sent home. "See," Hazel said as we left the center, "it was no big deal, and I lost half a day." I remained silent, swallowing my resentment. Once, when Hazel was a little girl, she'd had a sore throat, and Evelyn and I had taken turns at her bedside, changing compresses, singing songs to take her mind off the pain. She didn't remember that. Or did she think parental love was a one-way street? Wesley, unlike Hazel, didn't even try to hide his attitude toward me. He ignored me at dinner, defiantly changed the channel if I watched TV in the living room, and demanded that I not touch his things, even the newspaper he'd already read and left on the table. One evening when I went down to the kitchen for a glass of water, I heard them talking in the living room. The door was ajar, and the voices sounded distinct. "Can't go on like this," Wesley was saying. "He leaves his stuff everywhere, takes over the bathroom in the morning when I have to get ready for work, mumbles to himself all the time." "What can I do?" Hazel replied. "He's my father." There are special places for people like him. Wesley said, and his words hit me like a slap. Nursing homes where professionals can take care of him. Wesley, that's too much, Hazel objected, but not very convincingly. He's still quite independent. Today, yes, but tomorrow? Have you seen the way he trembles when he goes up the stairs? How he forgets to turn off the water? It's just a matter of time, darling. I didn't listen any further. I went quietly back to my room, forgetting about the water. Sat on the bed looking at Evelyn's picture. What am I going to do, darling? I whispered. Where am I going to go? The next morning at breakfast, Wesley was reading the paper as if nothing had happened, and Hazel was checking email on her phone. I silently ate the oatmeal I'd made myself. By the way, Dad, Hazel said suddenly, not taking her eyes off the phone, Wesley and I have been thinking, maybe you'd be more comfortable in a specialized facility, where there's medical staff, organized recreational activities for people your age. A nursing home, I finished for her. She cringed at this direct definition. A residence for the elderly. There are very nice options now, almost like hotels. And expensive, I suppose, I remarked. Well, with your pension and the money from the sale of the house, that's it. They wanted to get rid of me, but they wanted to control my money. Typical scheme. Put the old man in a golden cage and manage his money on his behalf. I'll think about it, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Thank you for your concern. Wesley finally pulled away from the paper and looked at me with ill-concealed impatience. Oswald, it's not just a concern, it's a necessity. Yesterday you left the stove on. That's dangerous. I didn't remember leaving the stove on. Maybe he was lying to push me into a decision. Or worse, was I really starting to forget these things? I'll be more careful, I promised. It's not just that, Wesley continued to press. You need constant care. Hazel and I work, and we're away a lot. What if you fall? Who's going to help you? I'm not that helpless yet, I countered, feeling my anger boiling over. Dad, Hazel interjected gently, no one's saying you're helpless. It's just that at your age you need to think about safety. And besides, you'll have more fun with your peers. You like to play chess, and I never have time to keep you company. She never liked chess. It was Tristan's passion, which I shared with him. Hazel was confused about even such simple things about her father. I want to consult with Tristan, I said. He'll be back soon, and we'll talk it over. Hazel's face twitched at the mention of her son. As you wish, she said coldly, but don't take too long to decide. We have plans too. After breakfast, I went to my room and dialed Tristan's number. He didn't pick up. Apparently, he was in a no communication zone. I left a message. Son, call me when you can. Nothing urgent, just want to hear your voice. I spent the rest of the day in my room, going through my mineral collection and thinking. The thought of a nursing home was humbling, not because I thought these institutions were something shameful. They are really necessary for those who can't take care of themselves. But I hadn't gotten to that point yet. I could still dress myself, cook simple meals, remember how to take my medications. Yes, I was sometimes dizzy and my joints ached, but that didn't make me disabled. And then, the very thought of my own daughter wanting to send me to a golden cage was unbearable. Not because of the care, but because of the money and my own convenience. In the evening, when I came down for dinner, Wesley brought up the subject of nursing homes again. You know, Oswald, a colleague of mine, recently put his father in Sunset Village. Great place. Pool, library, even a movie theater. And nurses around the clock. How much does it cost? I asked you directly. Not cheap, of course, he mumbled. But with your means, it's quite affordable. My means, I repeated. Not yours. There was an awkward silence. Hazel gave me a warning glance. Daddy, no one is claiming your money. This is about your well-being. Not, of course it is, I nodded. That's why you're so interested in my pension and the money from the sale of the house. Oswald, Wesley's face darkened. You're out of line. We've taken you into our home, taken care of you, and you're making accusations? Sheltered, I echoed in my head, as if I were a stray dog they'd graciously let in for warmth. I'm sorry, I said, feeling no remorse. I guess I'm tired. I'm going to lie down. In my room, I tried calling Tristan again, but to no avail. I lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling. It was times like this that I missed Evelyn the most. She always knew how to find a way out of difficult situations, to see light where others saw only darkness. "What would you do in my place, my dear?" I asked the photograph. "Where would you go?" There was no answer, of course. Only silence and the growing feeling that I was standing on the edge of an abyss, and the ground beneath my feet was slowly but surely crumbling away. The next day, Hazel brought me glossy brochures of several senior residences, bright, colorful, with pictures of smiling old people playing golf or sitting in chairs with plaids on their laps. Idyllic pictures that had nothing to do with reality. "So, look, Daddy," she said, spreading the booklets on my desk. "Pick out what you like best. We can take a tour of any of these places." I nodded, pretending to study the materials, but really thinking about how to get in touch with Tristan. My son was due back in 3 weeks, but I was no longer sure Hazel and Wesley would let me stay at their house until then. The morning was cold and dank. Outside my room window, the wind was bending the branches of the trees, throwing raindrops of rain mixed with snow against the glass. February was always an unpleasant month in Fairmont. Neither winter nor spring, but a dreary off-season, as if nature couldn't decide which weather to choose. I woke up with a heaviness in my chest and a nagging pain in my lower back. These pains had been plaguing me for the past few weeks, but today was especially bad. Perhaps the weather was to blame, or maybe it was the stress from the constant tension in the house. Hazel and Wesley kept pressing me with the nursing home issue. Every day they tossed me new brochures, told me stories of happy old people their friends had placed in such facilities, and the day before yesterday, they even tried to arrange a chance meeting with a counselor from Golden Autumn, the most expensive nursing home in town. I endured a half-hour conversation, during which a smiling middle-aged woman told me about the delights of life in their facility, as if it were a resort, not a place where people live out their last years. I nodded politely, asked the right questions, but inwardly shuddered at the thought that I might end up there. "How was it, Dad?" Hazel asked after the counselor left. "I think it's a great place, and only 20 minutes away we can visit you every weekend." "I'll think about it," I replied, knowing that no amount of thinking would lead me to the decision she was waiting for. Today, looking at the gray sky outside my window, I knew I had to act. Tristan was due back in 2 weeks, but it was getting harder and harder to wait. Last night, I'd overheard Hazel and Wesley talking. They weren't exactly hiding about how they'd already reserved a spot for me at Golden Autumn, and the first payment would have to be made on Monday. Today was Friday. I decided to call Tristan and tell him the truth. My old phone was dead. I had forgotten to put it on charge the night before, so I went down to the kitchen where there was a landline. Hazel and Wesley had already left for work, and the house was empty and quiet. Dialing Tristan's number, I hit the answering machine again. I left a message. "Son, it's Dad. Please call as soon as you can. The situation is difficult." I didn't want to say too much in the message, but I hoped Tristan would hear the concern in my voice and call back at the earliest opportunity. After hanging up, I decided to make myself some tea. I put the kettle on the stove. The electric kettle had broken a week ago, and Hazel hadn't had time to buy a new one, and took a cup out of the cupboard. The kitchen floor was damp. Apparently, Wesley had spilled something before he left and hadn't wiped it up. I stepped carefully, but my old slippers slipped on the tile. What happened next happened in slow motion. My foot slid, I lost my balance, tried to grab the countertop, but my fingers only slipped on the smooth surface. The fall was hard. I collapsed onto my left side and a sharp pain pierced my thigh. I had no strength to scream, only a wheeze escaped my throat. I was lying on the cold kitchen floor, unable to move, when I heard the sound of the kettle boiling. It whistled louder and louder, but I couldn't reach the stove to turn it off. At some point, the whistling stopped. The water had boiled off. I prayed that the kettle wouldn't catch fire. I don't know how long I spent like that, drifting between mental clarity and a fog of pain. Maybe an hour or two. At one point, I tried to reach for the phone hanging on the wall, but I couldn't make it even a meter. The pain was too intense. Toward noon, I determined the time by the sun peeking briefly through the kitchen window. There was the sound of the front door opening. Hazel had come home earlier than usual. "Daddy!" she called out. "Where are you?" I forgot the folder with the documents. "In the kitchen," I wheezed, but too quietly. "Daddy?" Her voice was getting closer. God, what happened? She stood in the kitchen doorway, looking at me with an expression that was a mixture of fright and annoyance. "I fell," I said. "My hip." I think I broke something. I can't get up. Hazel came closer and sat down beside me. Let me see. She gently felt my leg, and I cried out in pain. Yeah, it looks like a fracture. We need to call an ambulance. She took out her cell phone and dialed the emergency number. She explained the situation, gave me the address, then turned to me. The ambulance will be here in 20 minutes. Can you be patient? I nodded. What else was there to do? Hazel brought a pillow and put it under my head, then covered me with a blanket. How did it happen? She asked, and I heard something like suspicion in her voice, not sympathy. The floor was wet. I slipped. Sure. You should have been more careful, she said reproachfully. At your age, falling is serious. I didn't answer. Yes, at my age, falling is serious. And that's why the kitchen floor shouldn't be wet, and why you have to watch out for such things in a house where an elderly person lives. But it didn't seem to occur to Hazel that she was responsible too. The ambulance arrived half an hour later. Two paramedics carefully moved me onto a stretcher, asked about my symptoms, then carried me out of the house and loaded me into the car. I'll go with you, Hazel said, climbing into the ambulance behind me. She looked annoyed, as if I had arranged all this on purpose to stop her from working. At the hospital, I was immediately sent for x-rays, which confirmed my worst fears: a fractured femoral neck. The doctor, a young man with tired eyes, explained that at my age, such an injury requires surgery and long rehabilitation. How long will he take to recover? Hazel asked. With good care, from 4 to 6 months, the doctor replied. The first time will require constant observation, help in everyday activities. Then physical therapy, exercises to regain mobility. I saw Hazel's face change, become rigid, withdrawn. What if this kind of care isn't possible at home? She asked. Are there any alternatives? Of course, the doctor nodded. Rehabilitation centers, nursing homes with medical care, but they are usually more expensive and less comfortable than a home environment. I see. Hazel pressed her lips together. I was scheduled for surgery the next morning. Hazel stayed with me for a couple more hours, helped me get settled in, and then said, I need to go home. Warn Wesley and pack your things for your stay here. I'll be back tonight. I nodded, feeling grateful for her help, despite my obvious irritation. But Hazel didn't return that evening or the next day. She called the ward and said she had a work emergency, but would be there as soon as she could. I had the surgery in the morning as planned. I woke up from anesthesia alone, in an empty room, with a heavy plastered leg and dull pain in my whole body. On my third day in the hospital, Hazel finally showed up. She looked sleep-deprived and nervous. How are you? She asked me formally. I'll live, I replied. The doctor says the operation was a success. In a week, you can start light exercises. Good, she nodded, not looking me in the eye. Look, Dad, we need to talk. Something in her tone made me tense. About what? About what's going to happen when you get discharged. She took a deep breath. Wesley and I have discussed the situation, and we won't be able to give you the care you need at home. What do you mean? I felt my heart start to beat faster. So you're going to have to go to a rehab center or a nursing home with medical care. We've already contacted Golden Autumn, and they're willing to take you in as soon as you're discharged. Without my consent? I tried to sit up in bed, but the pain in my hip wouldn't let me. Dad, be reasonable. Her voice became harder. You need constant care. Wesley and I work full-time. Who's going to help you bathe, dress, cook your meals? Who's going to make sure you take your medications on time? We could hire a nurse, I suggested, for the duration of your rehab. At whose expense? She crossed her arms over her chest. A full-time caregiver is expensive, Dad. It would be cheaper and easier to pay for a place in a good nursing home where professionals would take care of you. I can pay for the caregiver myself, I said. I have some savings, which will run out quickly, she countered. And then what? Are we going to pay out of our own pockets? I looked at my daughter and didn't recognize her. When did she become so calculating, so cold? Or had she always been like this and I just didn't want to see it? Hazel, I said quietly, don't you realize you're sending me to a foreign place where I'll be lonely and miserable? Don't be dramatic, Daddy, she rolled her eyes. Golden Autumn has a wonderful environment, and besides, it's not forever. When you're fully recovered, we'll discuss other options. But I knew there would be no other options. Once in a nursing home, I'd never go home. I want to talk to Tristan, I said firmly. He's coming back from an expedition soon. Maybe he could take me in. Hazel's face contorted for a moment. No, Tristan's always traveling, she said. What good would he be? Besides, his apartment isn't big enough for someone on crutches. He doesn't even have an elevator. Still, I want to talk to him, I insisted. All right, she shrugged. Go ahead. But it won't change anything. The decision's made, Dad. With that, she walked away, leaving me confused and worried. I tried calling Tristan, but it still only went to voicemail. I left another message, more insistent. Son, please call me as soon as you can. It's urgent. I'm in trouble. 5 days later, I was released from the hospital. Hazel came to pick me up, helped me pack, get prescriptions for medication, and instructions for rehabilitation. Are we going home? I asked as the orderly wheeled me in my wheelchair to the exit. Yes, she answered briefly. Oh, but only for a couple hours. I've arranged for you to be admitted to the Golden Autumn tonight. Hazel, I don't want to go there, I said firmly. I want to stay home with my family. She didn't answer, only helped me into the car and threw my crutches in the back seat. Wesley met us at home. He was unusually animated, as if happy to see me back, but I quickly realized the reason for his good mood. Today was the day they'd finally get rid of me. How are you feeling, Oswald? He asked with fake concern. Did the operation go well? Fine, I mumbled, shuffling awkwardly on crutches into the living room. Good, he rubbed his hands together. So you'll be settling in tonight. Hazel and I have made all the arrangements. Your things are already packed. I looked at my daughter, who was avoiding my gaze. Hazel, I'm asking you again. Let me stay, at least until Tristan gets back. Sorry, Dad. She finally looked up at me, and I could see the cold determination in her eyes. We've already discussed everything. The decision has been made. Don't make it any harder than it has to be. Sorry, Yarm, this is my home, I said, feeling my voice tremble. You're my daughter. Do I deserve to be treated like this? This is our house, Wesley interjected. Mine and Hazel's. You're a temporary guest here, Oswald. And if we say you'd be better off in a specialized facility, then so be it. I looked at him with sudden clarity. This man had never considered me a member of the family. To him, I was just a burden to be rid of. Hazel, I turned to my daughter, ignoring Wesley. Are you really going to let your father be kicked out of the house? Is that what your mom and I taught you? I saw something resembling doubt flicker across her face, but it quickly disappeared, replaced by the usual irritation. You don't have to feel sorry for me, Daddy, she said coldly. Nobody's kicking you out. We're just giving you the best care we can. At my own expense, I added bitterly. And for whose money? Wesley intervened. You don't expect us to pay, do you? Wesley, Hazel shushed him, but without much enthusiasm. What? I'm just telling the truth, he said. Your father has become a burden, Hazel, admit it. The word burden hung in the air like a whiplash. A burden, I said quietly. That's what I've become to you. A burden. Dad, that's not what Wesley meant, Hazel began, but I interrupted her. No, that's exactly what he meant. And by the looks of it, you agree with him. Well, all right, I'll go, but not to Golden Autumn. Where? She asked with a sneer. You can barely stand on your feet. Where will you go? Anywhere, I answered with unexpected firmness. I'd rather go outside than to a place where they keep me for pity or money. I turned and, leaning on my crutches, headed for the exit. But Hazel blocked my way. Daddy, don't be silly, she said. You're not going anywhere. The car from Golden Autumn will be here in an hour. You need to rest before you move. I'm not going there, I repeated. And you can't make me. Actually, we can, Wesley interjected. We can get custody of you if we can prove that you're incapable of making rational decisions. And judging by the way you're acting right now, that won't be hard. It was a threat, a pure, unvarnished threat. I looked at Hazel, expecting her to contradict her husband, to say that they wouldn't do something like that. But she was silent, and there was agreement in her silence. I'm leaving, I said, feeling a wave of anger and despair rising inside. Now, I tried to step around Hazel, but she wouldn't move. You're not going anywhere, she repeated. Get out of my way, I gritted my teeth. You're not my daughter anymore. Her face contorted with anger. Get out of my way, you burden. She shouted the words I was sure she'd wanted to say for a long time. If you want to leave, good riddance. But don't come crawling back when you realize no one wants you. I recoiled as if she'd hit me. That's when Wesley intervened. He grabbed my arm roughly. Enough drama, he said, pushing me toward the front door. If you want to leave, go. But we're not running after you, old man. He opened the door and practically pushed me out onto the porch. I lost my balance and almost fell, holding on to my crutches at the last moment. Wesley, Hazel exclaimed. But there was more surprise than protest in her voice. He wanted to go, Wesley shrugged. I just helped. Hazel hesitated a moment, then disappeared inside the house and returned with a small bag. Your meds and a few things, she said, dropping the bag at my feet. When you come to your senses, call me. The door slammed shut, leaving me on the porch under the fine, prickly snow that had begun to fall from the gray sky. I stood leaning on my crutches, unable to believe what had just happened. My daughter, my flesh and blood, had kicked me out of the house, called me a burden, allowed my husband to shove me out the door like a piece of junk. Tears ran down my cheeks, mixing with the snow. I awkwardly bent down, picked up my bag, and hung it on my shoulder. Then I slowly, carefully stepped off the porch and wandered down the street, not knowing where to go. The February wind whipped through my light coat. Hazel hadn't bothered to put something warmer in the bag. My hip ached with every step, and my arms on the crutches tired quickly. But I kept walking, driven by pride and desperation. I had some cash in my pocket, change I kept for small expenses. No bank card, no ID. Everything was left at the house, even my cell phone with Tristan's number on it. By late afternoon, I made it to the center of town. The snow had intensified, turning into a real blizzard. I walked into an all-night cafe, bought a cup of coffee, and sat by the window, wondering what to do next. The waitress, a young girl with kind eyes, noticed my condition. Are you all right, sir? She asked, approaching the table. Do you need help? I wanted to lie, to say I was fine, but instead I burst into tears like a child. Through my tears, I told her my story. The daughter who kicked me out of the house, the son I couldn't get in touch with, the fact that I had no money, no papers, no place to sleep. The waitress, her name was Rita, listened to me sympathetically and then said, There's a homeless shelter 2 blocks from here. They take everyone, especially in this weather. I can show you the way when my shift is over. Thank you, I whispered, feeling grateful to this strange girl who cared more than my own daughter. An hour later, Rita walked me to the shelter, an inconspicuous building with a Good Samaritan sign over the entrance. The inside was warm and clean, though very modest. I was greeted by an older man in a shabby sweater who introduced himself as Frank, and after a brief conversation showed me to a bed in a shared bedroom. It's not a Hilton hotel, he said with a soft smile, but it's a roof over your head and a warm blanket, and tomorrow we'll deal with your situation. We have a social worker. She'll help you get in touch with your son. That night, lying on a narrow bed in a room full of strangers, I thought about the vicissitudes of fate. Until a month ago, I had a home, a family, dignity. Now I was one of those people society prefers to ignore, a homeless old man abandoned by his own children. In the morning, as Frank had promised, the social worker came, an energetic, middle-aged woman named Beverly. She helped me contact the police to report the missing documents, and then suggested I call Tristan. We have a phone, she said. You remember your son's number, we can try to reach him. Fortunately, I remembered Tristan's number by heart. Beverly dialed it, put it on speakerphone, and handed me the receiver. After a few beeps, I heard a voice that sounded so familiar and long-awaited. Hello, Tristan. I struggled to hold back tears. It's Dad. Dad, what's wrong? I got your messages, but I was in a no communication zone. I just got back to civilization yesterday. Are you okay? No, son, I said honestly. I'm not okay. Hazel. She kicked me out of the house. There was a pause and I was afraid the connection had broken. But then Tristan spoke, and I could hear a fury in his voice that I'd never noticed in my usually mild-mannered son before. What do you mean she kicked me out? Where are you now? At the Good Samaritan homeless shelter in downtown Fairmont, I answered, feeling ashamed of myself for saying that. Another pause then. I'll be there in 12 hours, the closest flight. Hang in there, Dad. I'll make it up to you. I spent almost 24 hours at the Good Samaritan shelter. Beverly, the social worker, helped me get a temporary ID card and even found a doctor who examined my hip and prescribed pain medication. The other residents of the shelter, despite their problems, treated me with respect and empathy. Especially touching was the attention of an elderly veteran named Caleb, who gave me his seat by the heater and shared a warm sweater. I was an engineer myself, he said as we talked over dinner. Then divorce, alcohol, job loss, spiral, you know. But I never thought I'd live to see a man your age thrown out on the street by his own children. I nodded, unable to speak of my daughter's betrayal without tears. I spent the night restlessly, waking with pain in my hip and nightmares in which I saw again and again Hazel's face contorted with anger, screaming, "Get out, you burden!" In the morning, Frank woke me by gently touching my shoulder. "Mr. Farrell, you have a visitor," he said with a smile. "Your son, I think." I struggled to get out of my bunk, fumbled for my crutches and leaned on them, and hobbled toward the exit of the dormitory. Tristan stood in the lobby of the orphanage, shuffling nervously from foot to foot. When he saw me, he rushed toward me. "Dad," he breathed out, hugging me gently. "God, what have they done to you?" I felt tears come to my eyes, but I held them back. I didn't want to cry in front of my son to show how broken I was. "I'm fine," I said, trying to smile. "Just a little bump in the road." "A little bump in the road?" Tristan shook his head. "They threw you out on the street in February with a broken hip. No money, no ID. That's not trouble, Dad. It's a crime." He looked exhausted after the long flight, but there was a fire of determination burning in his eyes that I knew well. It was the look he got when faced with a particularly difficult geologic task. Coolness and methodicalness were traits he had inherited from me and developed to perfection. "I'm taking you out of here," he said firmly. "Pack your things." "I only have this bag," I pointed to the ragged bag Hazel had thrown me. "And I'm not sure I can get up to your apartment on the 5th floor without an elevator." "I've rented another apartment," Tristan answered. "On the 1st floor, with wide doorways for your crutches. And I hired a nurse to come twice a day while I'm at work." I looked at my son in amazement. He had just flown in, must have been exhausted from the road and jet lag, but he had already managed to organize everything he needed. "When did you have time to do all this?" I asked. "On the way back from the airport." He smiled weakly. "Asanoikunum. There's a cab waiting for us outside now. Let's go home, Dad." We said goodbye to the shelter staff, thanking them for their help. Beverly gave Tristan her card and said she could help with legal matters if needed. Tristan nodded and discreetly whispered something to her. The cab took us to a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Fairmont. The apartment Tristan had rented was in a small 2-story building, and it was really adapted for someone with limited mobility. Wide doorways, no thresholds, handrails in the bathroom. Awesome. "It's only temporary," Tristan said as he helped me into the bedroom, "until you're fully recovered. Then we'll decide what to do next." He brought me some hot tea and sat next to me on the edge of the bed. "Now, Daddy, I want to hear everything. From the beginning." So I told him about how, after the house was sold, I moved in with Hazel and Wesley. How gradually the atmosphere in the house became more and more tense. How they started pressuring me about the nursing home, about the fall and the broken hip, about Hazel calling me a burden and Wesley pushing me out the door. Tristan listened in silence, but I could see his face stiffen as I told him, the cold fury in his eyes. "And all this time," he said quietly when I was done, "you haven't said a word to me about what's going on." "Why, Dad?" "I didn't want to bother you." I lowered my eyes. "You were on an expedition, doing important work. And then I was ashamed, Tristan. Ashamed to admit that my own daughter was treating me like a burden." He took my hand, and I felt the strength of his fingers, calloused from fieldwork, but sure and warm. "Listen to me, Dad. You must never, ever, ever be ashamed to ask for help, especially from me. You've spent your whole life taking care of me and Hazel. Now it's my turn to take care of you." He sounded so confident. I squared my shoulders. "What are you going to do?" I asked, knowing from experience that my son wasn't the type to leave bills unpaid. Tristan stood up and paced the room with his hands behind his back, a gesture he'd learned from me. "We'll take care of your health first," he said firmly. "Noi, tomorrow I'll take you to the best orthopedist in town. Then I'll take care of your paperwork and finances. I need to get your bank cards back up, get access to your accounts. And Hazel." I couldn't help but ask about my daughter, despite the pain she caused me. "Are you going to talk to her?" Tristan stopped and turned to me. and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't noticed before. A cold, calculating determination. "Oh, I'm pretty sure Hazel will want to talk to me when she finds out I have you," he said. "But for now, let her suffer the unknown. I want her to feel at least some of the anxiety you felt when you were on the street. I've never seen my son so cold." Usually Tristan was softer, more emotional, more like Evelyn with her empathy. But now I saw in front of me a reflection of myself as a young man, determined, principled, unforgiving of betrayal. "Ah, son, don't do anything you'll regret," I warned. "She is your sister after all." "And you're my father," Tristan countered. "And you almost died on the street because of her selfishness." "No, Dad. Hazel and Wesley are not getting away with this. I'll take care of it." The next day, Tristan took me to see Dr. Reeves, a leading specialist in orthopedic surgery. After an examination and new x-rays, Dr. Reeves confirmed that the surgery at City Hospital had been professionally performed, but rehabilitation would take time and patience. 6 to 8 weeks in a cast, then physical therapy, he said as he reviewed the scans. "Full recovery will take about 4 months, but with proper care and exercise, you can get back to your normal life." "He'll have everything he needs," Tristan assured him as he wrote down the doctor's recommendations. After the appointment with Dr. Reeves, we stopped by the bank, where Tristan helped me regain access to my accounts and get a new card. I was pleasantly surprised to find that Hazel hadn't had time to get to my savings, apparently planning to do so after she placed me in Golden Autumn. That evening, when we got home and had dinner, Tristan turned out to be a pretty good cook. My son sat across from me with a notepad and pen. "Dad, I need to ask you some questions," he said seriously. "And I want you to be completely honest with me." "Sure," I nodded, not sure what he was getting at. "When you lived with Hazel and Wesley, did you notice anything strange about their behavior, other than the way they treated you?" I wondered, thinking back to the months I'd spent in their house. "Wesley often worked late, sometimes didn't come home at night," I said. "Said he had projects, business trips. Hazel was angry about it, but she didn't make a scene." "Anything else?" Tristan was making notes in his notebook. "Hazel," I hesitated. "She's been drinking a lot lately. Not in front of Wesley, just when he was away. Locking herself in her room with a bottle of wine, and in the morning I'd find empty bottles in the trash." Tristan nodded, as if confirming his suspicions. "Did it start recently, or has it been going on for a long time?" "It's hard to say," I shrugged. "I noticed it about a month after I moved in with them, but it might have been happening before that." "What about the finances?" Tristan continued. "Did you hear them talking about money, debt, any unusual expenses?" I remembered a few overheard conversations. "One time, they were arguing over some bill," I said. Uh, Hazel yelled that he'd spent money on that crap again, and Wesley replied that it was an investment that would soon pay for itself. Tristan made another notation in his notebook, and his face became even more focused. "Do you know where Wesley works?" "Which company exactly?" "Northwest Logistics," I answered. "He's some kind of middle manager there." "Why do you ask?" Tristan closed his notebook and looked at me with the same cold determination I'd seen yesterday. "William, because I'm going to teach Hazel and Wesley a lesson they'll never forget," he said. "They think they can throw you out on the street with impunity? That they can treat you like you're worthless? They're wrong, Dad. They're very wrong." There was a determination in his voice that frightened me. My gentle, judicious Tristan had turned into a passionless vigilante. "What are you up to?" I asked anxiously. "Nothing illegal, if that's what you're worried about." He smiled weakly. "So, I'm just going to reveal the truth. About them, about their lives, about their business." "Tristan, you don't have to," I started, but he interrupted me. "Yes, Dad. They need to realize that their actions have consequences." Tristan left early the next morning, leaving me in the care of a nurse, a pleasant middle-aged woman named Maggie. He didn't return until the evening, with a briefcase full of papers and a look of restrained triumph on his face. "How was your day?" "Horam," I asked as he entered the living room. "Productive," he replied, taking off his coat. "Very productive." He sat down next to me on the couch and opened his briefcase. "Remember what you said about Wesley's weird spending? About what Hazel called crap?" I nodded. "I made some inquiries," Tristan continued. "I have a friend in the financial police. He can't give me confidential information, of course, but he can tell me where to look for publicly available data. He pulled several printouts from his briefcase. Wesley isn't just a manager at Northwest Logistics. He's responsible for the company's financial operations in Asian countries. And for the past 2 years, there have been some very strange transactions going through his department. I looked at the paperwork, but I couldn't make much sense of it. Columns of numbers, codes, company names in Chinese and Korean. Them. What does it mean? I asked, raising my eyes to my son. It means that Wesley is most likely involved in financial fraud, Tristan said. He set up several shell companies in Asia and is diverting some of Northwest Logistics funds there. Not too much to keep a low profile, but in 2 years, it was almost $500,000. I was shocked. Of course, I never liked Wesley much, but I didn't think he was capable of outright fraud. Are you sure? I asked. Him. It's a serious accusation, Tristan. I've checked the information very carefully, he nodded. And this is just the beginning. Remember what you said about Hazel's addiction to alcohol? I talked to the neighbors, and they confirmed that they often saw her drunk. One of them even has video of her last month trying to park and crashing into a dumpster. He didn't call the police out of respect for you. Why are you collecting all this stuff? I was beginning to understand, but I wanted to hear from my son. Tristan tucked the papers back into his briefcase and looked me straight in the eye. I'm collecting evidence, Dad. Proof that Wesley is a financial fraudster and Hazel is an alcoholic who gets behind the wheel while drunk. It's enough to ruin their careers and their reputations. But why? I still couldn't believe that my son was actually planning to get back at his sister in this way. Because, his voice became hard, they need to understand what it's like to lose everything overnight, like you did when they threw you out on the street. I shook my head, unable to fully accept the idea of revenge. Tristan, they're your family. No, he stood up abruptly. You're my family, Dad. Hazel stopped being my family the moment she called you a burden and let her husband push you out the door. And I will not rest until she realizes the mistake she made. At that moment, his cell phone rang. Tristan glanced at the screen and hummed. Espan, speak of the devil, he muttered. It was Hazel. He put it on speaker, and I heard his daughter's voice, nervous, frightened. Tristan, is that you? Thank God you finally picked up. Are you in town? Yes, Hazel, I'm in town, he answered coldly. And I know what you and Wesley did to Dad. Look, it's not what you think, she sounded panicked. Dad left on his own. He was inadequate. He refused help. Don't lie to me, Tristan interrupted her. I know everything. How you pressured him with the nursing home. How you called him a liability. How Wesley pushed him out the door like a stray dog. Tristan, please. Now there were tears in her voice. We're worried about Daddy. Where is he? Is he with you? Is he okay? He is now, Tristan answered. But no thanks to you. He was taken in by the Good Samaritan, a homeless shelter, Hazel. Do you understand? Our father spent the night in a homeless shelter because of you. We've been looking for him, Hazel sobbed. We called hospitals, the police. You're lying, Tristan said. I already checked. You didn't call anything. You were probably glad the problem had solved itself. It didn't. So she was almost shouting. Look, let's meet up. Talk. Wesley's at work right now, and I can drive over to wherever you want me to go. Not now, Tristan said after a short pause. I need to make sure Dad's okay first. I'll call you myself. He hung up without waiting for an answer. She's scared, I remarked. And she should be. Tristan nodded. It's just the beginning, Dad. Just the beginning. Over the next week, Tristan continued to gather information. He met with his friend from the financial police, with a lawyer who specialized in family matters, even hired a private investigator to follow Hazel and Wesley. I watched his actions with growing alarm. This wasn't how I'd raise my children. Revenge was never in my principles, even if the offense seemed unforgivable. But Tristan was adamant. Every night he brought new evidence against Hazel and Wesley. Photographs, documents, witness statements. I'm almost ready, he said Friday night, arranging the papers on the table. The Northwest Logistics Board of Directors will meet on Monday. The anonymous letter about Wesley's financial machinations has already been sent to them, with copies of all the evidence. Are you really going to do this? I asked, feeling my heart clench. Sinum, I already have, he answered without a shadow of a doubt. And tomorrow I'll file a petition with the court to declare Hazel incapacitated by alcohol addiction. I have testimonies from neighbors, videos, medical reports I got from your family doctor. Tristan, I shook my head. That's too much. Hazel made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But, but what, Dad? He turned to me, and in his eyes I saw pain and anger. You almost died in the street. If it hadn't been for the kind people at the shelter, who knows what might have happened? And you're asking me to just forget about it? Forgive them. I didn't know what to say. Part of me understood Tristan, shared his anger. But the other part, the part that was still a father to Hazel too, couldn't stand the idea of such ruthless revenge. Shapatornun. They deserve it, Dad, Tristan said quietly, seeing my hesitation. And believe me, I'm not doing anything illegal. I'm just exposing the truth they've been so careful to hide. The truth about who they really are. I looked at my son and saw myself in him. Young, principled, uncompromising. Tristan had inherited from me not only a love of geology, but also an unwavering sense of justice. And now that sense demanded retribution for those who had hurt his father. All right, I said at last. Do what you think is right. I won't stop you. Tristan nodded, grateful for my tacit approval, and went back to his papers, continuing to build the case against Hazel and Wesley like a geologist prying into the structure of a rock layer by layer to get to the truth hidden beneath. It had been a week since Tristan had sent the anonymous letter to the board of Northwest Logistics. My hip was slowly healing, and I was able to get around the apartment with one crutch instead of two. Tristan hired a physical therapist who came 3 times a week and did special exercises with me. The pain was slowly receding, but there was still a heaviness in my soul. I couldn't stop thinking about Hazel. Despite her betrayal, she was still my daughter. It was hard to accept the idea that my son was preparing a real revenge against her and her husband. I understood his feelings, his outrage and anger, but something inside me resisted the idea of such retribution. On Monday morning, Tristan left for work. He had been offered a consulting position with a geology company in Fairmont until he returned to expeditions. I was left alone, unless you counted Maggie, the nurse, who was doing chores in the next room. Sitting by the window with a book I couldn't bring myself to read, I pondered the vicissitudes of fate. Until 3 months ago, I had a home of my own, a relatively healthy body, and the illusion that my daughter loved me. Now all of that was lost, and though I had Tristan's support and care, the bitterness of loss lingered. A phone call snapped me out of my reverie. It was Tristan. Dad, turn on the news, he said without preamble. Channel 6. I grabbed the remote and turned on the TV. The familiar Northwest Logistics building appeared on the screen, with a reporter standing in front of it with a microphone. It has come to light that a high-ranking manager of Northwest Logistics, Wesley Price, has been arrested on suspicion of financial fraud and embezzlement of corporate funds. According to our sources, Mr. Price created a network of fictitious companies in Asian countries, and for several years withdrew corporate money through them. I felt my back grow cold. Tristan's plan had worked even faster than he'd expected. Tristan, what have you done? I whispered into the phone. I didn't do anything, Dad. I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. I just gave the information to the people who needed to know it. The rest was the work of the police and corporate security. But, the arrest? You didn't say it would come to an arrest. I didn't know how serious his machinations would be, Tristan answered. I guess my suspicions were more than confirmed. Don't worry, Dad. This is just the beginning. He hung up and I kept watching the screen as Wesley was led out of the building in handcuffs. His face was pale, confused, his eyes running like a hunted animal. I'd never had warm feelings for my son-in-law, but at that moment I almost felt sorry for him. An hour later, the doorbell rang. Maggie opened the door and I heard a familiar voice. I need to see Oswald Farrell. I'm his daughter. My heart clenched painfully. Hazel. I hadn't seen her since the day she and Wesley had pushed me out of their house. I'll walk you out, Maggie said after a brief hesitation. But if you upset Mr. Farrell, I'll ask you to leave. Footsteps approached and Hazel appeared in the doorway of the drawing room. She looked terrible, her face gaunt, her eyes red from crying, her hair disheveled. She was clutching her purse so tightly that her knuckles were white. Ha ha, Daddy, she breathed out, taking a step into the room. You're here. Here, I confirmed, not knowing what else to say. Maggie moved away quietly, but I knew she was nearby, ready to intervene if necessary. You, looking better, Hazel faltered awkwardly. Is your hip healing? Little by little, I nodded. The doctor says I should be able to walk normally in a couple months. An awkward silence hung between us. There was so much to say, but neither of us knew where to begin. Did you hear about Wesley? She finally asked, sitting down on the edge of the couch across from me. Yeah, I saw the news. He was arrested, Daddy. Her voice shook. Surinamara, right in the office, in front of everyone. They're saying he stole almost $1 million through some shell companies. But it's not true. It can't be true. I stared at her, not knowing what to say. Did she herself believe in her husband's innocence? Or was it just another lie? Why did you come, Hazel? I asked her bluntly. She flinched as if struck by a blow. Yeah, I was worried about you. I wanted to make sure you were all right. You weren't worried when you kicked me out of the house with a broken hip. I didn't try to hide the bitterness in my voice. You didn't care when you called me a burden. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Dad, I wasn't myself. Stress, problems at work, Wesley kept pushing. I know that's no excuse. What I did was awful, unforgivable, but I didn't want it to turn out this way. I looked at my daughter and saw her as the little girl I once taught to ride a bike, who I used to comfort when she fell and broke her knees, who I read bedtime stories to. Somewhere deep down inside, I still loved her, despite the pain of betrayal. What do you want, Hazel? I asked quietly. Why did you really come here? She lowered her eyes, rubbing the strap of her purse. I need your help, Daddy. Wesley's in jail and his accounts are frozen. I can't pay his bail, and the lawyer wants an advance. That's it. It all came down to money again. And you came to me, I shook my head. The man you threw out on the street like a piece of junk. I know I don't deserve your help, she sobbed, but I have no one else to turn to. All of our friends turned their backs on us as soon as the news of Wesley's arrest hit the media. I remembered lying on the cold floor of the homeless shelter, not knowing what would happen to me tomorrow. How I felt abandoned, not wanted by anyone. And part of me wanted Hazel to experience the same thing. I can't help you, I said, even if I wanted to. Tristan's handling all the financial matters right now. Tristan, she spit out her brother's name, like something bitter. That's him, isn't it? He's behind all of this. Wesley's arrest, the public shaming, the way we've been shunned. I didn't deny it. There was no point in lying. He's protecting me, Hazel, like you were once supposed to. Protecting? Her voice rose. He's ruining our lives. Wesley's facing up to 10 years in prison. And today I got a call from the bank saying our mortgage has been canceled because of suspected fraud. We could lose the house, Dad. I remembered my house that I sold at the insistence of my children. The house where the best years of my life were spent with Evelyn, where Tristan and Hazel were born and raised. It was now occupied by another family, and I was living in a rented apartment, dependent on my son's care. I'm sorry, Hazel, I said sincerely, but I can't help you, and I'm not sure I want to. She jumped up, her face contorted with anger. You've always cared more about Tristan, always. He's your copy, your reflection. And I've always been superfluous. That's not true, I shook my head. I loved you both equally. You know that. I don't know anything, she grabbed her purse. I was a fool to come here. I thought you were still my father, but you're as cold and heartless as Tristan. She stormed out of the room, slamming the door so hard the glass shook. A moment later, the front door slammed too, and there was silence. Maggie peered into the room. Are you all right, Mr. Farrell? She asked anxiously. Yes, Maggie, I sighed. Just family stuff. She nodded and walked out, and I stayed seated, staring out the window and thinking about the strange twists and turns of fate, about how the people we love can hurt us the worst, and how revenge, even just revenge, is not truly satisfying. In the evening, Tristan returned, lively and pleased with himself. Have you heard the news? He asked, taking off his coat. Wesley has been formally charged with fraud and grand larceny. He's been released on bail, but he's under house arrest. Shudurun. Who paid his bail? I asked, remembering Hazel's words about financial hardship. His parents, Tristan hummed. They sold their boat to get their precious son out of jail. But it's a temporary solution. He's still going to do time. Hazel came by today, I said quietly. Tristan froze, his face hard. Why? What did she want? Money, of course, I shrugged. For lawyers for Wesley, and maybe to pay the mortgage. She said the bank had canceled their loan. Oh, that, Tristan grinned. Yes, I contacted their bank and reported Wesley's suspicious financial transactions. They decided to reinsure themselves. They could lose the house, Tristan, I said with concern. They should be thankful they haven't lost it yet, he said with a wave of his hand. And that's not all, Dad. He pulled a folder out of his briefcase and handed it to me. Inside was a legal document entitled Application for Declaration of Invalidation of Gift. What's this? I flipped through the pages, not understanding the legal terminology. I found out that Hazel somehow got you to sign a deed of gift for half of your savings, Tristan said bitterly. The document was executed a week before you went into the hospital with a broken hip. Do you remember signing a paper like that? I racked my brain. Something vaguely recalled. Hazel slipped me some paperwork, said it was for health insurance. She said they were insurance papers. I shook my head. I didn't read it carefully. I trusted her. Exactly, Tristan gritted his teeth. She took advantage of your trust. But I've already contacted a lawyer. We'll challenge the deed of gift on the grounds that it was fraudulently obtained. And we have witnesses, your primary care physician, who will testify that you were taking strong painkillers that could have affected your ability to make decisions. I stared at the documents and felt a strange feeling grow inside. A mixture of pain, frustration, and humility. So Hazel hadn't just kicked me out of the house. She was actively planning to get her hands on my money, using my trust against me. Do what you think is right, I said quietly. I won't interfere anymore. Tristan nodded, satisfied with my decision. Don't worry, Dad. I'll fix everything. They'll pay for everything they've done. The next day, Tristan came home from work even more animated. Remember I told you about collecting evidence of Hazel's alcoholism? He threw another folder on the desk. Today I sent copies to her superiors, with the video of her getting behind the wheel drunk and the medical notes. Why, Tristan? I looked at my son tiredly. Wesley had already been arrested. Their home was in jeopardy. Isn't that enough? Not enough. He shook his head. She has to go through what you went through. Lose not only her home, but her job, her reputation, her self-respect. Only then will she realize what she's done. I thought of my daughter, the little girl with pigtails who once looked at me with adoration, of the young woman who was so much like me in her determination and tenacity, and about what she had become. Calculating, selfish, willing to betray her own father for money. Part of me thought Hazel deserved everything that was happening to her, that it was just retribution for what she'd done. But the other part, the part that was still her father, was rooting for her, feeling sorry for her. Don't overdo it, son, I said quietly. Revenge is a poison that poisons the one who carries it in the first place. It's not revenge, Dad, Tristan said. It's justice, and they get exactly what they deserve. The next few days brought new news. Wesley was officially fired from Northwest Logistics for actions inconsistent with company policy. His picture appeared in business publications with headlines about corporate fraud. Hazel was placed on administrative leave, while her professional suitability, a euphemism for the dismissal process, was investigated. Our petition to revoke the gift was accepted by the court, and the case was scheduled for a hearing in a month. Tristan hired one of the best attorneys in town, specializing in cases of financial fraud within the family. I watched all of this with mixed feelings. On the one hand, I couldn't help but recognize that Hazel and Wesley deserved the consequences of their actions. They had dealt with me cruelly, heartlessly, without the slightest hint of remorse. But on the other hand, seeing my daughter's life crumble was excruciating. On Thursday, about 2 weeks after Wesley's arrest, Tristan came home with news. They've put the house up for sale, he said, showing me the online ad. Urgent sale, reduced price. Apparently, they're under a lot of pressure. They need money for lawyers, I remarked, looking at the pictures of the house I'd spent the last few months in. The house I'd been kicked out of as a homeless person. Not just for lawyers, Tristan chuckled. I heard that Northwest Logistics is filing a civil suit against Wesley for damages. If they win, and they will, he'll be paying damages for the rest of his life. I could see the satisfaction in his eyes. The plan had worked even better than he'd expected. Hazel and Wesley were losing everything: their jobs, their homes, their reputations, their money. Their lives were falling apart in front of their eyes, and it was all the result of Tristan's actions. My son, who avenged me with the cold, methodical determination I inherited from myself. Are you satisfied? I asked quietly. Tristan was silent for a moment, staring at the computer screen where the house was advertised for sale. Yes, he said finally. I'm happy. They got what they deserved, Dad. Everything that's happening to them is a direct result of their own actions. I just, accelerated the process. I nodded, unable to argue. He was right after all. Hazel and Wesley had brought this storm on themselves. Wesley had chosen to engage in financial fraud on his own. Hazel had chosen alcohol as a way to deal with her problems. And they both chose to kick me out of the house rather than show me basic human compassion. And yet, I couldn't help but feel bitter that my daughter, my own flesh and blood, was capable of such betrayal. And that my son, whom I had always thought of as softer, more like his mother, was capable of such cold, calculating revenge. That night, lying in bed, I had a long conversation with the picture of Evelyn on my bedside table. What would you say about all this, darling? I whispered, looking at her smiling face. You've always been wiser than me about family. Would you have approved of Tristan's actions? Or would you advise me to forgive Hazel no matter what? There was no answer, of course. Just the silence of the night and the quiet ticking of a clock counting down the seconds of a life that hadn't gone the way I'd expected. But somewhere deep inside, I knew that Evelyn, with her infinite kindness and ability to forgive, would surely have found a way to heal this family wound, a way that wouldn't have involved such total destruction. But Evelyn was no longer with us, and we, me, Tristan, and Hazel, had to deal with the consequences of our decisions and actions on our own. Spring was early and warm in Fairmont. The snow had melted in March, and by April the city parks were covered in tender greenery. My hip was healing well. Dr. Reeves was pleased with the progress. I could walk with one cane, though my leg was still sore by the end of the day. Tristan had bought a small house on the outskirts of town, a 2-story house with a large garden and a ramp for my convenience. This is your house now, Dad, he said, handing me the keys. Yours and mine. No one will ever kick you out of here again. I was touched by his concern, but I couldn't help thinking that this was my third home in the last year. First, I lost the house I lived in with Evelyn most of my life. Then I was kicked out of my daughter's house. And now this new house is beautiful, comfortable, but still not filled with decades of memories like that first one. In early May, when the Fairmont Gardens were in bloom, our doorbell rang. I was home alone. Tristan had gone on a business trip to a neighboring state for 3 days. Maggie, my nurse, who now came only twice a week, was helping me prepare dinner in the kitchen. I'll get it, she said, wiping her hands on a towel. She came back a minute later with a concerned look on her face. Mr. Farrell, your daughter and her husband are in there. I told them you were resting, but they insist on seeing you. They say it's important. I felt my heart beat faster. Hazel and Wesley. I hadn't seen them since the day my daughter came to ask for money for lawyers for her husband. I knew from Tristan that their cases were getting worse. Wesley's trial was set for July. He was out on bail, but the charges were serious. Hazel had lost her job over a drinking scandal, and their house had been sold for debt at well below market value. Show them into the living room, I said to Maggie. I'll be right out. Leaning on my cane, I walked slowly into the living room, where Hazel and Wesley were sitting on the couch. They looked drained, exhausted. Hazel had lost a lot of weight, and Wesley looked like he had aged 10 years. His hair was graying at the temples, and there were deep shadows under his eyes. Daddy, Hazel stepped up to meet me. Thank you for seeing us. I nodded and sat down in the chair across from them. Maggie looked into the room. Can I get you some tea or coffee? She asked. No, thank you, I replied. We won't be long. She nodded and left, but I knew she was close enough to hear if I called out. You look good, Daddy, Hazel said, nervously rubbing the strap of her purse. I've gotten better. Thank you. I looked at her and Wesley, waiting for them to get to the purpose of their visit. Mr. Farrell, Wesley finally spoke, clearing his throat. I'd like to apologize for what happened in February. The way we treated you, it was unforgivable. Yes, Daddy, Hazel picked up on that. We're both sorry. We weren't ourselves. We had a lot on our minds. But that's no excuse, of course. What we did, I'll never forgive myself for it. I looked at them carefully. trying to see if their apology was sincere. I could see tears in Hazel's eyes, but something in her gaze made me doubt it. Perhaps I was just getting too suspicious after everything that had happened. Sheil, I accept your apology, I said discreetly, but I suppose you came for more than that. They looked at each other, and Hazel spoke again. Dad, we're in a very difficult situation. We had to sell the house, but the money was barely enough to cover some of the debts. Wesley is facing jail time, and the lawyers are demanding huge fees. I don't have a job, and no one wants to hire me because of the scandal. What do you want from me? I interrupted her, knowing what she was getting at. Help, Daddy. Her voice trembled. Financial help. We need money for lawyers, for housing, for basic needs. We're on the edge. I looked at my daughter and her husband and had a strange feeling, a mixture of pity and detachment. Not so long ago, I would have given anything to help Hazel. But now, after everything that had happened, I saw the situation differently. Shirar, where do you live now? I asked, realizing that their house had been sold. At my parents', Wesley mumbled, temporarily in their guest room. But it's unbearable, Hazel added. Shakona, they're always reproaching us, reminding us that they had to sell the boat to pay for the lawyers. And you decided to turn to me, I finished her thought, to the man who was kicked out of his house with the words, "Get out, you burden." Hazel lowered her eyes. Daddy, I already apologized for that. I wasn't myself. Are you sane now? I looked at them both. Or do you just need the money desperately enough to get over your pride? Mr. Farrell, Wesley stepped forward, I understand your distrust. If I were you, I'd have my doubts too. But we've really changed over the months, realized our mistakes. We've seen how easy it is to lose everything we have. And what exactly did that teach you? I asked, not hiding my skepticism. To value family, Hazel answered quickly. To value loved ones. To realize that money is not the most important thing in life. Interesting, I nodded. And exactly how much money do you want to get from me to confirm that they are not the main thing in life? Hazel flinched as if I'd hit her. Wesley put his hand on her shoulder in a protective gesture. Mr. Farrell, we realize we're asking a lot, he said, but the situation is truly critical. I'm facing up to 10 years in prison if we can't mount a good defense. And if I go down, Hazel will be left all alone, without a livelihood. Didn't you, Wesley, tell me there were special places for people like me? I looked him straight in the eye. That a nursing home was the best solution for a burden? He looked away, unable to bear my gaze. I was wrong, cruel and wrong, and I sincerely apologize. And yet, I turned to Hazel, you haven't answered my question. How much money do you want? She hesitated, then gave me a sum that took my breath away. It was almost all I had left from the sale of the house. And what would the money be used for? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. For lawyers, Hazel said. For rent. To get back on my feet while I looked for a new job. I looked at my daughter and saw not remorse, but calculation. She wasn't here to make up. She was here to get money. And her husband, that pompous, self-righteous man who had once shoved me out the door, now sat in my living room looking like a beaten dog. No, I said calmly. I'm not giving you any money. Daddy, exclaimed Hazel, you can't do this. We're family. Family? I shook my head. No, Hazel. A family doesn't throw its own out on the street. A family doesn't cheat each other for money. A family doesn't apologize only when they need financial help. You don't understand, her voice shook with anger and desperation. We're on the verge of ruin. Wesley could go to jail. And this is the result of your own decisions and actions, I answered firmly. Wesley chose to engage in financial fraud. You chose to cover for him and deceive me. You both decided to kick me out of the house when I became an inconvenience. Can't you forgive me? Tears welled up in her voice. You're my father. And you're my daughter. I looked her straight in the eye. And that's the only reason I agreed to see you at all. But forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. And it doesn't mean giving you the opportunity to use me again. Wesley stood up, his face contorted with anger. Come on, Hazel. We're not welcome here. You're wrong, Wesley. I stood up too, leaning on my cane. I'd be glad to see you here if you'd come with a sincere apology instead of an outstretched hand. Hazel stood up as well, her eyes throwing lightning bolts. It was Tristan, wasn't it? He turned you against us. Got it into your head that all we want is your money. Tristan had nothing to do with it. I shook my head. I can see it all and I know it. And I've made up my mind. No, I won't give you money. Not now. Not in the future. You'll regret it, Wesley hissed. When I go to jail and Hazel's on the street, you'll wish you'd never helped your daughter. Sonna, maybe, I shrugged. But I certainly won't regret not letting you use me again. Hazel grabbed her purse and headed for the door. At the threshold, she turned around, her face wet with tears. You're not my father anymore, she said bitterly. Out. I refuse you as you refuse me. You have already given up on me, Hazel, I answered quietly. The day you kicked me out of your house. They left, slamming the door, and I was alone in the living room. Maggie came in quietly and put her hand on my shoulder. Are you all right, Mr. Farrell? She asked with concern. Yes, Maggie, I sighed. I'm just tired. I think I'm going to lie down for a while. When Tristan returned from his business trip and heard about Hazel and Wesley's visit, he was outraged. Had they come to ask for money? He shook his head. After all they've done, they have no shame or conscience. Sharantul. They're desperate, I said, not trying to defend them, just stating a fact. Sometimes despair makes people do strange things. What did you say to them? Tristan asked, though he already knew the answer. I said no, of course, I shrugged. So, they didn't come to make up, they came to get money. I'm not naive enough not to realize that. Tristan nodded approvingly. You did the right thing, Dad. They don't deserve your help, and I'm proud that you were able to say no to them. It wasn't easy, I know. It wasn't easy, I agreed, but necessary. For the next few weeks, I tried not to think about Hazel and Wesley, focusing on my recovery. The physical therapy was working, and by June I could walk short distances without a cane. Dr. Reeves was pleased with the progress and said that by the end of the summer, I could forget about the fracture. One day, while looking through the local newspaper, I came across an ad. The Science Club for Kids at the Town Museum was looking for a geology teacher for the summer. Something about the ad caught my eye. I had worked as a geological engineer all my life, but had never taught. However, the thought of sharing my knowledge with children suddenly seemed appealing. What do you think? I asked Tristan, showing him the ad. Can I handle teaching? Of course, Dad, he smiled. You always had a way of explaining complicated things in simple words. Remember when you told me about geologic eras when I was 6? I still remember every word. His encouragement gave me confidence, and the next day I called the science club. To my surprise, they were happy to have an older professional with hands-on experience. A week later, I conducted my first class. The children proved to be inquisitive and attentive listeners. I told them about rocks and minerals, how our planet was formed, and showed them samples from my collection. It was a real pleasure to see their eyes light up with interest. Somer Somiram, how was the class? Tristan asked when I got home. It was great, I smiled, feeling energized. The kids asked so many questions that I didn't have time to tell them half of what I had planned. We'll have to reschedule for next time. I told you you could do it, he patted me on the shoulder. You have a talent for teaching. Teaching science club became a new meaning in my life. I taught classes 3 times a week, preparing materials, collecting samples. The kids loved me, calling me Professor Ozzy, short for Oswald, which the youngest of them coined. In July, I started writing my memoirs, not so much for publication, but for myself, to organize my thoughts and memories. I wrote about my youth, my years of study, my first expeditions, about meeting Evelyn, about our life together, about the birth and upbringing of our children, and of course, about recent events, betrayal, pain, loneliness, and new beginnings. Wesley's trial took place in mid-July. He received 6 years in prison with parole after 3 years. Hazel was left alone, without a husband, without a home, without a job. Tristan told me she got a job as a waitress at a cafe on the outskirts of town. Don't you want to talk to her? He asked me once. Now that Wesley's in jail, maybe she's changed? I wondered. Part of me still loved Hazel, still saw her as the little girl who'd once held my hand, afraid to cross the street. But another part of me remembered her last words. You're not my father anymore. No, I finally said. Oh, if she's really changed and wants to reconnect, she'll find her own way back to me. And if she doesn't, well, then so be it. Tristan nodded, respecting my decision. In August, when summer was in full swing, the director of the science club suggested that I continue teaching in the fall, as part of the regular program. I accepted gladly. Working with children gave me what I had been missing for the past few years, a sense of need, of usefulness. By that time, I had almost fully recovered from my fracture. Sometimes my hip ached before the rain, but it was a small price to pay for a return to an active life. Tristan and I even began taking short hikes around Fairmont, not as long and challenging as his expeditions, but enough to enjoy nature and movement. One evening, as we sat on the veranda of our house watching the sunset, Tristan asked, "Are you happy, Dad?" I pondered the question. Am I happy after everything that had happened, after the betrayal, the pain, the loneliness? Oh, I wouldn't call it happiness in the full sense of the word, I answered honestly, but I have found peace, an inner acceptance of what had happened, and a new meaning to life. In teaching? He smiled. In that too, I nodded. But more than that, it's about moving on, no matter what. It was about not letting resentment and disappointment define my life. Tristan was silent for a moment, staring up at the sunset sky. Then he said quietly, "You know, I'm still mad at Hazel for what she did to you, for how easily she betrayed her own father. I'm not sure I'll ever be able to forgive her." "You don't have to," I put my hand on his shoulder. "Forgiveness can't be forced. It comes when you're ready, or it doesn't come at all, and there's nothing wrong with that." "But you forgave her, didn't you?" He turned to me. "Despite everything she'd done?" I looked up at the setting sun, coloring the Fairmont sky shades of pink and gold. I thought about Hazel, about our lives, about what had brought us to this ending. "I'm not sure it's right to call it forgiveness," I said finally. "Rather, I accepted what had happened as part of life, like a geologic event that changed the landscape but didn't destroy the earth itself." Tristan smiled at my geologic metaphor. "So now what?" he asked. "Now, move on," I shrugged. "Teaching, writing my memoirs, enjoying your company. Maybe someday Hazel will find her way back to us, or maybe she won't. Either way, my life goes on, and I intend to live it well, as your mother taught me." We sat on the veranda until the last rays of the sun disappeared over the horizon. I thought about my life's journey, about its unexpected turns and forks, about how, at 75, I began a new chapter I never planned, about how loss and betrayal led to unexpected renewal. Life didn't end that February day I was kicked out of my house. It simply changed, transformed, the way rocks are transformed by time and the elements. And in this new form, I found my way, my meaning, and my place in the world. After all, isn't that what geology teaches us? That even after the most catastrophic changes, the Earth continues to exist, to adapt, to find a new equilibrium. And that there is no force that can stop this eternal process of renewal and continuation of life.